Okay. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in different parts of the world. I'm really excited to be back on these webinars, IPGDC webinars after a couple of weeks of taking time off. Exciting here because we have a very special team, two people presenting on a very important topic. Cybersecurity programs, accreditation criteria for cybersecurity programs, and the skills and knowledge every graduate needs. And we have some very experienced experts here to share their experiences with us. We have Dr. David Gibson, who is a professor emeritus of computer and cyber science at the U.S. Air Force Academy. During his 34-year career in the U.S. Air Force, he worked in electronic warfare, computer security, space systems, intelligence, and cyber operations. And prior to retiring, he served as professor and head of the Department of Computer Science at Air Force Academy, where he led development of Academy's cyber education training. Okay, so and research programs. As a member of the Joint Task Force on Cybersecurity Education and co-author of Cybersecurity Curriculum 2017. Since 2000, he has volunteered as an ABET program evaluator and is currently on the executive committee of ABET's Computing Accreditation Commission. Received his PhD in Computer Information Science from Ohio State University. And with him is Dr. Lawrence G. Jones, who has 50 years of experience in software development, management, research, and education. He also has over 35 years of experience in nonprofit leadership involving accreditation of university STEM programs. Dr. Jones retired in 2013 as a distinguished principal researcher at the Software Engineering Institute of Carnegie Mellon University. He served a career in the U.S. Air Force and is the former chair of the Computer Science Department of the U.S. Air Force Academy. He is a fellow of ABET, recognized authority for accreditation of college programs, and CSAB, the Federation of Societies Supporting Accreditation of Undergraduate Programs. So with that, we have a couple of very distinguished people here to share their thoughts with you. So welcome participants, welcome panelists, welcome speakers. Over to you, Larry.
Right. So are the slides showing then?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Welcome everybody. Delighted to be here, and I'm also delighted to have my friend and colleague David Hoot Gibson. He goes by Hoot. For those of you who want to Google that and look that up to see where that came from, you'll find it.
More interested in the presentation.
While we're focused on the accreditation aspects, the title is actually accurate, because if we talk about the skills and knowledge that every graduate needs to enter the workforce here, the ABET accreditation criteria are based solidly on important work that Hoot has done, among other of our colleagues, in setting up the guidelines or curricular recommendations for the ACM. And a lot of our other colleagues are involved in this effort as well, including the chair of the ACM Community College Education Committee, who took the work that Hoot and others did for the baccalaureate degree and applied it for associate programs. So Hoot and I have worked closely on this, and we will get here. I'm not Krishna. I guess I'm going to have to. There we go. We're fine. So we'll give you the agenda here. I will go through the background on ABET accreditation in general to show you where the context of the cybersecurity criteria fall, and Hoot will dig into the details on this. But so we'll get through that portion quickly so that you have an opportunity to dig into this. We'll talk a bit about the approach that we use for bringing on new disciplines such as cybersecurity and also cybersecurity engineering. And then Hoot will dig in deeply with the 4-year program criteria and the 2-year program criteria, and we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. So the key word, for those of you who may not be as intimately familiar with ABET as we are, confidence. Be confident is the tagline, and the notion is that the important stakeholders who depend on the quality of programs that graduates are produced to enter the workforce globally. And as you'll see here as we go through some of these things, a lot of the criteria are not the technical aspects, but more the professional and the ideas of making people responsible individuals to participate in important disciplines that we accredit. So very quickly, and this number seems to be growing daily, but right now we have over 2,200 volunteers. These volunteers come from all aspects of the profession, including teachers and industry practitioners. They conduct the evaluations, they make the decisions. They're supported by a professional staff at ABET headquarters. And you can see the impact is fairly large because with 175,000 graduates a year coming from ABET accredited programs. And it's actually a federation of the leading technical societies that have an interest in this. So maybe one way to think about this is that each of these professional societies could have established their own accreditation mechanisms and processes and procedures, but banded together back in the early 1900s to focus on this and have consistency, because a lot of these programs exist in the College of Engineering, in many cases, some in arts and sciences, but to make things smoother and to focus on this so that the processes could be more consistent and more professionally done. That's why they have federated together. Within that context, there are 4 commissions who make all these decisions. The Engineering Accreditation Commission, which is the largest. Computing, catching up, particularly with growth in things like data science and cybersecurity. Engineering technology, about on a par. And then coming along with applied and natural sciences, which is a growth area, which recently we helped bring on to start to take a statistical look at data science accreditation for those of you who might be interested in that in the future and want to make me get up early in Colorado to do this again. So there we go. The process is a peer review process, but it also relies heavily on a self-examination by programs to take their own look at themselves and document how they believe that their program meets the criteria, so that the peer review team can come in, take a look at what the program itself thinks, using these experts, volunteers that we've talked about before, who help review this, in the days where pandemic doesn't get in the way, on-site visits. It's been a challenge the last couple of years to do virtual visits. But then the process has extensive due process aspects where the program gets an opportunity to review the findings, provide feedback, see if there's any corrections that might be able to be made before a final decision makes. And as you see there, it takes about 18 months start to finish to execute this process. So I will give a very quick overview of the harness, the criteria overview, into which the cybersecurity program criteria sit. And I think many of you are familiar with the idea that it's an outcomes-based approach with an emphasis on continuous improvement. So institutions define their mission and objectives. The outcomes are how are we preparing students for professional practice when they graduate, and demonstrate how the criteria are being met. And then following industrial practices for continuous improvement, evaluate how well you're achieving the objectives that you set out, and do corrections or improvements. As we say, many of us say in ABET, you don't have to be bad to get better. And so the idea then to focus this on continuous improvement and all the other aspects that support that program are linked to how well you're producing the outcomes that you set out to do. The criteria are divided into 2 chunks. general criteria which apply to all the programs under the purview of a particular commission. And then there are additional tweaks allowed in certain of those general criteria to add specifics that focus on the program discipline. So on this slide here, you can see the ones in orange are common within a commission and pretty common across the commission. So the idea was to try to make it, if you mean the same thing, say it as closely to the same way as you possibly can. But within a commission, these things will be in fact identical. So the idea of what do we do about student support? How do we bring them in? How do we keep track of how they're doing? How do we make sure that they meet the requirements when they graduate? The program educational objectives, what do you expect the graduates to be able to do a few years out following their graduation? The student outcomes, there's some basic ones that are common within a particular discipline in the commission's purview, but that's where you can allow additional outcomes to be added. The continuous improvement criteria, continuous improvement should be a similar process regardless of what discipline you're in. And then not surprisingly, curriculum and faculty would be allowed additional tweaks for program criteria. And then what facilities do you have to support the program to be able to achieve its outcomes? And lastly, hidden back there, what's the institutional support that's provided? So how did we get into this ABET, and why was it important? My understanding here is that many of you may have attended another one of these webinars a few weeks ago in which the threat was presented, and we'll just briefly recap this here. The thing that leaps out at me that I saw, that I knew the problem was big, but until I saw this little factoid, I was rather taken aback. That says, take all the illegal drug trafficking in the world and the cyber threat in terms of dollar or pound or euro impact is greater than that. We don't have a month go by for sure that we don't see something where some data leak has occurred or some hack has occurred to personal information, banking, ransomware, and recently certainly attacks on critical infrastructure such as the power grids and things like that. So a lot of these systems that have been out there were not built for the world that we are in today, where we have these threats and people that are more than willing to take action to try to exploit them. In response, you can see that about worldwide, we're talking millions of unfilled jobs. So the international, it's not confined to any one country. The cyber world knows no political or geographic bounds. So there's a huge demand out there. Last time we checked, a lot of these job demands were for four-year degrees. I think what employers are realizing as they look at this, that perhaps some of these jobs have been overspecified in terms of that. So there's a growing acceptance of the fact that associate degrees and associate programs can fulfill the needs quite nicely. And so ABET has been involved in both the four-year programs and the two-year programs. And interestingly, you'll notice that another area that we're looking at in ABET is these alternative credentials, such as certificates. And in particular, when you're doing hands-on in cybersecurity, certifications are a highly valued asset. I have heard, in fact, people who have finished their master's degrees in cybersecurity and saying, I got to go get a certificate before I know what I'm doing. And so hundreds of college programs out there in response to these threats and to the job motivation. It would appear, yeah, I went backwards. So the last time that we were able to get together in person at an ABET symposium, you'll notice that we had a key theme, which was on Generation Cyber. And in the course of doing this, the first day we had evaluating the threats that were out there, and you can note here the ability to attract key players in the U.S. in particular. So we had a former national security advisor to W. Bush, executive vice president of FireEye, who was involved in the credit Equifax forensics and many others of when they come in would do the postmortem of what happened here when these big systems got hacked. Cybersecurity chair at the Naval Academy, and then Chris Ingalls, who former deputy director of the National Security Agency, and he is recently the national director, so he's White House level national directors of cyber. So big names, big people there to show the threats. The second day we addressed what's the response. Well, part of that response is ABET stepping in to do its mission, which is to help provide support for the graduates that are going to be needed to fill this. So here's a bit of history here. So Hoot and others started back. Sorry?
Can we skip a slide there?
I don't think so. Oh, yep, sorry about that. Had a little button bounce there. Thank you, Hoot. These days, it takes a lot of work, as Hoot and I both know, to bring on a new discipline for accreditation. And so there's a process that at least those of us who have worked in the computing, and we've tried to help this with others, and to see, is it worth it? So the first thing we try to do is involve both of ABET volunteers along with the professional societies, and in this case, CSAB, which federates the ACM, the IEEE Computer Society, and most recently for data science, the American Statistical Association, to say, is it worth it? Do we have sufficient employer demand? Are there existing college programs? I'm not a market analyst, but I could do this one. This is pretty easy. Definite yes. If that's the case, let's work to develop draft program criteria, get feedback from the stakeholders at various venues, refine this, and then go into the formal ABET process, whereby you have a couple of readings, as they're called, the first and the second reading, where we officially pass a first reading version, set it out for 1 year of public review and comment, see if there's any tweaks necessary, and this could eventually iterate down to where we have the version that's for general release and piloting in the meantime. And as Hoot will explain, we're in the process of piloting some of these right now. And so while this may look depressingly slow, this was done at warp speed, because if you consider an 18-month accreditation cycle, and we're involving university and community college programs that are quite busy as it is, not to mention being slammed with the pandemic. This was pretty fast, and one of the reasons it's pretty fast is because we have on our ABET side of the volunteer experts many of the leaders in these international groups that worked on this. So you can see that about 3 years to get the cybersecurity criteria published, and pretty much simultaneously with the ACM releasing of the curriculum. And then we were able to speed that process up even more because of the ability to piggyback on the 4-year work. And as we said, we have one of our colleagues who led the community college 2-year version of this, in which they took the aspects that they thought would be important for associate programs and were able to extract that information for that. So
I'll go ahead and pick up here, Larry, with a little more on this slide. And
sure.
Thanks so much for the great intro and context there. And thanks to everyone for joining us this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are. But yeah, as Larry pointed out, 7 years seems like a long time, but boy, I think we were moving pretty fast here. We kind of got started back in 2014 when a group of folks who really kind of saw or felt that cybersecurity, cyber science, whatever you want to call it, should be its own discipline, separate from computer science or information technology or some of the more well-established disciplines at the time. And back in 2014, that was actually a controversial proposition. But we had a lot of representative from the U.S. service academies. I was representing the Air Force Academy at the time because a very obvious interest in developing strong cybersecurity programs there. There were a lot of civilian schools with strong cybersecurity programs. Some of them were NSA Centers of Academic Excellence. But this group we got together and formed called the Cyber Education Project really was working toward developing what would a 4-year cybersecurity program look like. What does that discipline, what does the curriculum look like, and so forth. So folks involved with ABET was very involved in that process. We went to a lot of conferences, talked to a lot of people, and then in late 2015, the Association for Computing Machinery, the ACM, kind of picked up the ball, dedicated some funds, also brought on IEEE Computer Society, IFIP Working Group for Computer Security, and Association for Information Systems, and formed this joint task force that really started working hard in developing curriculum guidance for cybersecurity discipline. It built on a lot of the work of the Cyber Education Project, but in just a few years developed what was published at the end of 2017, Cybersecurity Curriculum 2017, which are the academic guidelines for a 4-year undergraduate cybersecurity program. And at the same time, as Larry said, ABET was working very closely with the working group. I was on both of those committees, so that helped developing accreditation criteria of what ABET requires to accredit a 4-year cybersecurity program. And 3 years after we started thinking about this, having published criteria seemed very fast, certainly at the time. The following year, we actually ABET accredited the first 4 cybersecurity programs, 4YCYs, just abbreviation for 4-year cybersecurity programs. Air Force Academy, my program was one, the Naval Academy and 2 civilian institutes with very strong cyber programs were involved in that. I think we're now up to about 24, almost 24 4-year programs accredited by ABET in cybersecurity. And then also, as Larry mentioned, shortly on the heels of that effort, we started looking at community college programs, started talking to a lot of community colleges with strong cybersecurity programs. A lot going on in that field, a lot of 2-year programs developing and teaching cybersecurity now. So ABET just published, basically ACM developed its 2-year guidelines, which were based on the 4-year guidelines. And then just this summer, ABET accredited its first 2-year community college associate degree cybersecurity program. So that's a short history. So now we'll go ahead and Larry and move on to probably 2 slides here to get to the actual criteria. And as Larry mentioned, all of ABET's criteria are based on general criteria that apply to all programs within a commission. And here we're primarily talking about the computing commission. So that includes computer science, information systems, information technology, cybersecurity, and coming online, data science now. So these criteria apply to all of them. And the 2 that are specific to the discipline are the student outcomes and the curriculum requirements. So 2 of those 8 criteria that Larry briefly mentioned before and talked about before. So on the student outcomes criteria, these are outcomes that all programs must demonstrate, their students are able to achieve from the program, and they have to assess how their students are achieving those. The first 2 here for the general computing programs look familiar what you'd expect for computer science or information technology. analyze the computing program, and apply principles of computing and other relative disciplines to identify solutions, design, implement, evaluate a solution to meet a given set of requirements in the context of the program's discipline, which might be cybersecurity, computer science, or other. Then the last three are actually more broad and probably common to the other commissions, engineering and so forth, dealing with effective communication, professional responsibilities, and teamwork. So what we'll see now on this next slide is the cybersecurity specific student outcome that is added on top of those 5 computing student outcomes, and that is apply security principles and practices to main operations in the presence of risk and threats. And both the Joint Task Force and ABET felt that this kind of captures the essence of the cybersecurity discipline and how it differs from some of the more well-established disciplines, computer science, information technology, and that really involves that, more than just patching software, plugging firewalls, and so forth. To work in this discipline, you really need to understand the threat, and may need to be able to carry out operations to counter an active threat against computer systems. So that is, the principles provide the underlying, theory. The practices mean you're able to do this. So in practice, what this student outcome and the criteria basically means is when ABET evaluates a program, they are looking for students having the ability to not only design, build, secure, but also actively defend a computer system, a network, an enterprise system. And so we'll often see students that have labs that they're working on securing systems and defending systems. They may be involved in capture the flag type competitions, security competitions, cyber defense competitions, where they really get to practice the skill set of maintaining the security of systems and defending systems. So that's really where this student outcome comes into play, and we're kind of uniquely define cybersecurity beyond the computing practice. Now moving to the curriculum requirement. So again, I'm going back to the general computing that applies to all of the computing disciplines. Some of this more general in making sure that the program's educational outcomes are designed in such a way that the students can attain the student outcomes. The curriculum really fundamentally needs to prepare the graduates of the program to be successful in the discipline, the computing discipline for which they're studying. And then one more slide on the general computing requirements. And so here, kind of, ABET's very much gotten away from bean counting and checklists. There is a 30 semester hour, so that's a hard requirement, credit hours for the 4-year programs. And then getting into the topics more, it's still fairly broad, talking about all of computing here, techniques, skills, tools necessary for computing practice. So that kind of means this is not just a theory-based 4-year program. There needs to be practice. Students need to come out with skills to do the computing requirements of the program. Principles and practices for secure computing was added just a couple of years ago to all computing programs, not just the cybersecurity program. And ABET found there's still a number of computer science and other computing programs out there that are quite light on secure computing, which is a little bit of a surprise now for as important an aspect of all of computing security is. So that's a hard requirement for all ABET accredited computing programs now. And then of course the broader context and the implications locally, globally of the important work and the ethical considerations, the professional considerations need to be in there in all computing programs. Okay. Starting to get to the meat of the cybersecurity here now. So for cybersecurity 4-year programs, ABET requires 45 semester credits, so that's over and above the 30 credits of computing. And then the first linkage here to the CSEC 2017 is the program must include applications of what the CSEC document calls cross-cutting concepts of confidentiality, integrity, availability, risk, adversarial thinking, and systems thinking. So these are the concepts that really should permeate and cut across many different courses and topics within a cybersecurity curriculum. So when ABET's evaluating a program, and this requirement means we should see confidentiality, risk addressed in more than one place in the curriculum, and ideally develop from foundational coursework through more advanced coursework. The risk and adversarial thinking here are reflecting some of the unique aspects of cybersecurity. And the system thinking is not just only the technical systems, but also the social, the human systems that are critically important in maintaining security of a system. So the broader application there. Okay, and then this following slide here kind of really gets to the meat of the criteria requirements. CSEC 2017 on the Joint Committee, we spent a lot of time trying to how can we organize the topics of the cybersecurity discipline, and we'd made some progress in that with the prior cyber education project, and we quickly realized there's no perfect solution to this. There's no perfect organization, but we came up with these 8 knowledge areas in the Joint Task Force that generally go from more narrowly focused technical topics, data security, to more broadly focused topics, to the most broad societal security. And the CSEC 2017 document goes into a lot of detail, spends maybe 40 or 50 pages discussing all of these in great detail, breaking each one of these knowledge areas into sub-knowledge units, listing learning outcomes associated, listing the essential aspects of each one of these topics, of each one of these knowledge areas. So a lot of detail there provided in the guidelines by the ACM and the other organizations for programs looking to develop and organize a cybersecurity degree. What ABET provides here is really this high-level description, and what the requirement is that all accredited cybersecurity programs for ABET must contain some coverage of each one of these 8 topics. Some programs are going to focus much more heavily on certain topics than others. Some of the topics are very technical, and some programs may dive very deep into those. Some of the component security topics, for example, supply chain management, reverse engineering, are much more specialized, and some programs probably will be kind of touched lightly on those. As you can kind of see, the first 5 of these are primarily technical, computing and cybersecurity related topics, where the last 3, human security, organizational security, societal security, or more broad. Some of these are things especially the organizational security, you might find in an MIS program, maybe in a business school as well. But the Joint Task Force felt all these topics are very critical for any cybersecurity program, 4-year cybersecurity program, to cover at some level. So when an ABET team goes to evaluate a cybersecurity program, they're going to look to make sure there is some coverage in each one of these 8 areas that make up the total of 45 hours of computing and cybersecurity. And if there are questions at the end here, I'd be glad to go into more specifics there. As you dig down into these in CSEC 2017, you see a lot of the familiar cybersecurity topics popping up one place or another, occasionally in multiple places. So we were pretty successful and able to get a number of programs on board, be accredited for the 4-year program here very recently. And so right on the heels of that, ABET saw the strong demand within the 2-year community, mostly community colleges, associate degree programs, And so we began working with, I think you can go to the next slide here, Larry, began working with a lot of community colleges that had strong cybersecurity programs. Quite a few of those were designated through the National Security Agency, U.S. National Security Agency, as 2-year centers of academic excellence in cybersecurity. This was a new area for ABET's computing accreditation program. We had not yet accredited 2-year programs, only had accredited 4-year programs. So worked a lot with the community colleges on that to make sure we were just making the criteria appropriate for 2-year programs. Went to lots of conferences, did a lot of outreach, and worked closely with NSA on the curricular requirements that they had put out for and were widely adopted by many programs. So, how does the 2-year program differ from what you just saw for the 4-year program? So again, the differences only really show up in the student outcomes, criterion 3, and the curriculum, criterion 5. We quickly found that building upon the general computing requirements took a lot, was difficult to do for a 2-year program. Now, 4-year program is going to have a lot more gen ed and a lot more room for coursework, obviously, than a program with half the number of credit hours. And if you're not familiar, many of these 2-year associate degree programs are highly regulated by their individual states of what they can have. So the 2-year criteria very much emphasizes the cybersecurity content while downplaying and reducing general computing requirements. As you'll see, basically the 2-year criteria do not build upon the computing student outcomes, but they replace them. We'll look at those here in the next slide. And then the total requirement for content is 30 hours for cybersecurity. So these are the 5 student outcomes. The last 3 should look very familiar: effective communication, professional responsibilities, teamwork. The first 2 are more narrowly focused on cybersecurity. Analyze a broadly defined security problem and apply principles of cybersecurity to the design and implementation of solutions. And number 2 should actually look familiar because this is very close to the 6th student outcome for the 4-year cybersecurity programs. Apply the security principles and practices to maintain operations in the presence of risks and threats. So again, as student outcomes, all accredited programs are required to demonstrate that their program enables their students to achieve these student outcomes, and they're required to do assessment and demonstrate through the accreditation process that their students are indeed meeting these requirements. Okay, I think we need to go 2 slides forward, Larry, to get to the curriculum. Okay.
What happened?
Yeah. Okay, so the curriculum, this is kind of some of the boilerplate, looks familiar here. The requirement is 30 hours versus 45 hours for the 2-year degree. And the emphasis here within the curriculum is application of techniques, skills, tools for cybersecurity practice. So again, not just theory, there's a heavy emphasis on application. And the cross-cutting concepts from CSEC 2000 also appear here. The curriculum, the primary curriculum requirement, next slide, however, reads identical to the 4-year. All 8 of the topic areas that appear in CSEC 2017 appear in the ACM's 2-year guidance, Cyber 2-year 2020. The expectation here is that for a 2-year program, there will be likely less coverage, but there still needs to be some coverage in each of these 8 areas. And then finally, the last slide here on the curriculum. This actually reflects a recent change as of this summer, so out for comment. In the programs currently, the 2-year programs currently being evaluated do not have programming and scripting skills listed as a required element. Beyond this year, they will, assuming this change gets formally and finally approved. But we've added some programming and scripting content is required, as well as some advanced topics that build on the cross-cutting concepts and cybersecurity topics. Obviously, for a 2-year program, there'll be less room for advanced concept. And then a very light requirement on mathematical skills, just making sure the program ensures the students have the mathematical skills to meet the requirements. Typically, for there's going to be some a little bit of math required, certainly for understanding cryptography and doing the cryptography elements in the program. And I think that's all I've got for my slides. And so now ready to open it up for questions. And I think, Michael, right, you're going to take over on that?
I do. Can you hear me all right? All right, very good. All right, so, you talked about ABET starting to get into the process of reviewing programs and so forth, and you listed a few. What do you think the scope is? I mean, how many programs are there, and do you sense that there's going to be a lot of traction in getting more and more programs reviewed by ABET, or what's your sense on that? And I'll give that to either Hoot or Larry.
I can talk to the community college one because when we looked at that, one of the first things we did to try to reduce the search space and also reduce some of the uncontrolled variables was to look at US-based programs that already had some accreditation somewhere. And at the time, I believe we looked at something like 150. I'm not sure what that is right now. I believe National Cyber Watch. Do you have those numbers?
I do not on me right now, but yeah, there are a lot of community programs at various levels. A lot of them are associate of applied science. There's some associate of science, but there are a lot of them out there now, and I think that number is correct. There are some that are purely distance learning, and others that are traditional classroom.
Yeah, I can't pull the link up on the top of my head, but National Cyber Watch is a US-based nonprofit, and they keep a close tab on all of this sort of thing. And so if you were to go to their website, they have a lot of information such as regional emphasis in the US. I believe they also have the international as well. Yeah. But they're the keeper of that particular set of statistics.
Okay, yeah, I'm kind of curious because the students obviously are the ones that will benefit greatly by making sure they're choosing the right program, and I'm just trying to get a sense for just the pure numbers that they have to choose from. So it sounds like a lot. What about industry? What is industry? I know they've been involved. We have obviously industry advisory councils and so forth, but I know along this journey of working with the NSA and other groups and so forth, and the listening sessions and so forth. Tell us about a little bit about industry involvement, what their desire is. Where do they see us in the big scheme of things?
I'll start talking Hoot while you think.
This is for both of you. So, but yeah, Larry, why don't you say it?
Yeah, we actually, ABET has an industry advisory council, and for the past decade at least, we have had strong representation from cybersecurity professionals on that council, and they've become a much more important voice. And so the commitment there with the people from not just companies that like FireEye that specialize in providing those kinds of services, and but also major players like Verizon who worry about their critical infrastructure being attacked. The job demand that we showed in one of our slides, where worldwide, let's see, what was it? It was 3.5 million unfilled positions. So. And when you look at the reason that the market analysis of whether this was worth it or not, we subscribe to various news periodicals. Every week you come out with two, if you want to make big bucks as a graduate, boys and girls, here's where you go. You go to cybersecurity or you go to data science. And they're all out there just with huge demand. Didn't you have something to add, Hoot?
Yeah, the industry, first of all, would like to get as many well-prepared, well-trained cybersecurity workers as they can get, and they really there's a fairly broad range of skill sets that industry is looking for, and the accredited 4-year programs make up a lot of that. There's some niche jobs where they want someone with a PhD to be working cybersecurity, but that's fairly small. More to the other end, we found a good 2-year cybersecurity degree can meet a lot of the industry requirements, and quite frankly, they're not getting enough graduates with 4-year degrees. So they're also looking for many of the same jobs 2-year degrees, and even still, they're probably last I checked, many industries were not getting as many 2 years as they wanted. So there's this huge demand, and I think hitting at different levels here of preparation is helping meet the need.
For those of you who want to dig into that sort of thing, the U.S. National Institute of Science or Standards and Technology has an initiative under it, which is called NICE, National Initiative on Cybersecurity Education, and they take the potential job classifications for cybersecurity workers and break it down to excruciating detail. So if you're interested in seeing what that spectrum of job classifications, NICE, under the National Institute of Science, Standards and Technology, would give you that insight.
Yeah, because I think, if I was a student and I was interested in this field, should I go pursue the 2-year or the 4-year? I mean, the 2-year, obviously, it's 2 less years of going to school, and maybe I can get out faster and make a good living and so forth. So,
well, one other thing that's, and as Hoot said, you'll find different states have different requirements. California, for instance, puts a heavy emphasis on general education, which makes it rather tough. A lot of other states, though, recognize the community college pipeline as being an excellent way to do development of your industry, your jobs, economic development tied strongly to that. And a lot of cybersecurity associate programs are aligned heavily with popular certificates, which, as we mentioned earlier, those certificates are highly valued by industry. So in some ways, I don't know, if somebody want to go out and make big bucks and be job ready, picking a community college program that's aligned with a popular certificate seems like a really good way to go.
Yeah, I know the hot skills are always the thing that employers are looking for. So I do have a question from the audience. What about cybersecurity courses online? Have you seen a lot of those on the 2-year side now? Do you see have you seen a lot of those offered I guess virtually or just straight up standard online kind of programs?
So there are quite a few out there, and ABET has accredited some 4-year online programs. So right now we've not had at the 2-year level. We're really just getting started. Just have now just the first 2 accredited. So don't know at the 2-year level if there will be interest in that. I think a lot of programs will have no problem meeting some of the curricular requirements. The broader requirements that ABET has for a quality program can sometimes be more challenging for new programs that just start up. So that takes some work to develop. But there's certainly many online programs out there, and some by traditional. I'd say some by purely online institutions, and then there are a number of traditional brick and mortar schools that offer an online version of the degree, which may be extremely similar to what their in-class, in-person version is. So there are quite a few options out there.
Yeah, probably even better reasons for students to pay attention to whether these programs are accredited or not, because they have so many opportunities, right? So many choices. I think having the ABET seal of approval is probably quite an interesting important aspect.
That's certainly something that we find in these new disciplines when the when the demand's out there, the people that do these offerings are not unaware of that, and the marketers are quick to jump in, and some programs are more robust than others, to be quite honest.
Well, that's kind of a nice segue to this question I have from the audience about how does ABET and our criteria, how do we make sure we're staying ahead of the curve in terms of what's the latest and greatest, I guess?
Well, all those 22 volunteers, 2,200 volunteers, I should say, are either in academia, and that's not always the latest and greatest, but also we have a lot of representatives from industry among those volunteers, and so they're seeing what the current practices are. And my sense is, compared to a lot of academic disciplines, cybersecurity has really been pushed to stay up with the technology because it is changing so much. So even on the academic side, I think we're seeing new practices, new techniques come in more quickly. That doesn't necessarily mean that the criteria needs to change very quickly for specific practices and tools and techniques. We try to write the criteria in a general way, and it applies over time, but we're constantly reviewing criteria. One thing I meant to mention on the computing requirement for information security, we are just explicitly adding in privacy to that, based on the recognition from many of our constituents and schools and employers out there that while we kind of felt, yeah, it's in there, that was explicit, that was important enough to call out explicitly in the general computing criteria. So we're always, every year, the commissions are looking at, the criteria committee is looking at what can be improved, what can be updated in the criteria. So it's constant evolution.
Okay. So I have a question from the audience about sharing a program syllabi or syllabus. And so I think what the question is referring to is the programs that are accredited and what do they look like. Let me answer that question, okay? Because we announced, we've, as both Hoot and Larry have mentioned, we've gone through this process now of accrediting programs. We update our public website on the 1st of October, thereabouts, could be the 2nd of October, and it indicates all the programs that have been accredited for that cycle. And so I'd ask you to check back in on the 1st or 2nd of October, and you can search on the cybersecurity. You'll see which programs are accredited, and I'd invite you to maybe visit their websites, and you can take a look at what those programs look like. And there's the websites themselves, the institutional websites themselves will give you some detail on the content and so forth. So a good question. That's a good question.
Yeah, I'll add, and a lot of those programs are very anxious to share their curriculum. Also, as Larry mentioned, National Cyber Watch is a really good resource for that, and you can pull out a lot of example curricula there. And actually, if you Google a bit, you'll find Clark and other cybersecurity criteria, and NICE also has a lot of Larry mentioned, has a lot of useful resources. So there is a fair amount out there of good stuff.
Yeah, and if you're specifically interested in associate programs, the ACM's two-year 2020 document actually includes 2 or 3 examples from leading community colleges.
And ACM being the Association for Computing Machinery. I think most people know that, but in case they don't. All right, so we only have a couple of minutes left, and I want to go back to Hoot because we had talked about this just before the webinar started. So talk a little bit about the engagement with international and how that's, how that happens through, I guess, IEEE, ACM, whomever, in terms of standards and topics and those kinds of things.
Right. So the ACM is I'd say pretty internationally focused and tries very much to be. And the early working group where we got together, the IFIP group had several representatives from the working group on computer security education and bringing the ideas there. And so that was very useful to try and get a breadth of perspectives. I noticed looking at our accredited 4-year degrees, we have right now it's primarily U.S. institutions, but we have at least one non-U.S. institution that has their 4-year cybersecurity program accredited. So ABET certainly accredits quite internationally, and so really want to get good ideas wherever they are, and make sure we're keeping up with what the practice of industry is, what industry needs, and making sure that the academia is staying current and meeting our requirements.
Good. Yeah, well, I just want to make sure that people understood that, because this is a global problem, a massive global problem, as Larry pointed out at the very beginning. And, we need a good, reliable, and we want to have confidence in our global commerce, electronic global commerce. And of course, these students, these future graduates are going to help us do that. All right, listen, we've pretty much come to the end of our time. So let me just, first of all, thank both of you for presenting. This is excellent. And I think, information that people will really benefit from, and of course, underscoring the need to make sure there's some quality assurance in cybersecurity education. And with that, let me just turn it over to Hans Hoyer. Hans, you want to wrap up with just a few comments?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. First of all, David and Larry, this is quite fascinating. And I will certainly work together. We will to share this presentation globally. So because the kind of work that you've done, it's quite amazing and impressive, and I really deeply thank you. I do have one question before I want to make some other comments not related to your wonderful presentation. Who are the focus here? And you indicated there are some other universities, other countries. Besides Israel, what are some other countries? I'm trying to think of Europe, for example, or even Latin America, other parts of Asia. What are some countries that are also deeply working on this issue? Could you share a few comments?
I'm not really sure currently which countries. I know there was a lot of work in England and in Great Britain when we were looking through this, but I think the EU also had working groups on this as well. But, my sense is everybody is doing a little bit and looking what everyone else is doing in this area. And at the time, with a lot of push from the federal government, I think the U.S. was kind of pushing the edge, and a lot of folks were looking at what the U.S. was doing. But right now, everyone's in the same challenging situation and looking for the best ideas wherever they come from. I don't know, Larry, if you have anything to add to that.
Well, maybe Michael can even chime in. I know that at the last in-person ABET symposium, we had a very large international community, and we've had those particularly pick up, I guess, in the most recent virtual ones. And the presentations that we've made at those symposium sessions were heavily attended, so a lot of interest from around the world, including India, I'm sure.
I think that's growing.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you. Just in terms of, let me just switch a bit, just take a couple of minutes. We have members of our global IFES, GDC, IUCE community here today. I just want to give an update that we are working diligently to have our GDC Industry Forum in Dresden, Germany in a couple of weeks. It'll be virtual. Very few people are going to be actually traveling per se to Germany per se. I just wanted to know, and it's coming together. The attendance will be very good. I just want all of you to be aware of that. Also, as co-chair, I'm working very closely with close friends and colleagues in Madrid, Spain. Our global conference of IFES GDC in Madrid in this November, and we are very optimistic, a very dynamic, exciting, multifaceted program. An important piece besides the of course of faculty, corporate colleagues, deans, and so forth, is the engagement of students. And this has been a fundamental value, and it also very much to the topic of today's very thoughtful presentation, the students and their engagement. I just wanted to, again, highlight that. And a final, well, a couple of other final comments. I'm very happy to share with the global community the wonderful work we are doing. As you know, our third and fourth edition of the books written by women engineering leaders in India and in Africa. And I hope to be able to publish this month the India edition. We have many amazing leaders there contributing to the book, and then Africa, hopefully by October. Again, we're making good progress here, and we'll be having some webinars inviting women leaders in Africa and India and giving presentations, and then a large webinar during our forthcoming conference in Madrid per se. And finally, I'm making wonderful progress on the GDC IFES Global Awards, the Loeni Morel Award for the Latin American community, the GDC Diversity Award, and the IFES Duncan Fraser. So I just wanted to all of us who are part of our community, who are joining us today, to just for you to know that we're continuing to work on that and hope for you to get engaged. And finally, David, Larry, thank you kindly on behalf of our community. Very thoughtful. And Michael Milligan, thank you very much for being with us and facilitating this conversation.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, happy to be here.
And stay healthy, all of you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks again, everyone. Bye now.
Bye-bye.